Hello and welcome back to Invisible Innocence. I am your host, Megan Moret, and this is the second part of my conversation with Dan Nash. He is the founder of the Human Trafficking Training Center. So I hope that you got to listen to the last episode. Like I said, we're just going to continue this conversation. Dan is prior law enforcement and is really just trying to tackle the world right now in educating about prevention and awareness due to human trafficking. He's educating everybody. There's law enforcement, nurses, doctors, advocates. Dan, who else? Who else you talking to out there?
Yeah, we're talking to really anybody. Law enforcement is really our lane. We do some medical training, for human trafficking as well. But law enforcement is really our lane because if you don't train the police, then everything else just stops. And we want to make sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah. Hey, so Dan, before we move on any further, I've got to ask what those skins are on the wall behind you. Are those
some of them are coyotes and some of
Oh.
them are foxes.
Oh, did you get those, Dan?
I did.
Did you? Well,
I did.
I hate to tell you, but I could get you some free skins right down the road where I run. They're crossing my path every day. The coyotes, not the foxes, but the coyotes. And they are big out here right now for some reason. It's crazy.
The coyotes are a real problem in the Midwest and really all around the United States, but they're really, really hard on really all the critters. And most people don't know that coyotes are not native to Missouri. They've only been in Missouri around 100 years, a little over that maybe, but they have really taken over, and they've really put a lot of other species like wild turkeys right now are at an all-time low, and the conservation department is trying to figure out how to remedy that, and a lot of that is predation from the coyotes. And the other thing is, even though I have a couple of foxes back here on the wall, foxes are, especially red foxes, are really kind of at a low as well because the coyotes kill them all.
Oh gosh. Okay, so let me ask you this. Do they ever want to harm humans? Do I need to be looking over my shoulder after I run past a coyote?
No,
They're
they
gonna
don't want
leave me
anything to do
alone?
with you. Unless they're like rabid or have some kind of a disease, they don't want anything to do with you.
Okay, well, that is good to know because every time I tell someone, "Oh, yeah, I just came across another coyote," they're like, did you run?" I'm like, that's what I'm doing. I'm out running. So do I need
No,
to run
what they would do is get your little dog. They would eat
Yeah.
your little dog in like a minute.
Ooh, that would be really a sad day for me. So we're
The
not gonna
coyotes out here by where I live, they ate my neighbor's cats, both of them.
Oh
So,
gosh. Oh,
in
were
fact,
they
the
just I
neighbor
bet they
lady,
were devastated.
she saw the coyote get her cat in the yard and just like jog off with it with its tail hanging out.
Oh gosh, that's terrible. Oh my gosh. Okay, so back to business. So in the prior episode, we were talking to Dan just really about his experience, his own personal experience in law enforcement and human trafficking, and really just who the victims were, who the traffickers were. Talked a little bit about how to differ between prostitution, sex work, trafficking, things like that. So the question that I want to start this off with is, what would you like to see happen when it comes to prosecuting traffickers? It's been frustrating for many because it seems that to identify the traffickers first can be a challenge, but then to keep them behind bars can be a challenge. So is there something that you would love to see happen and change? And something that's
Yeah.
like doable?
Well, for sure. I mean, something that we could do is really the main thing that we want to do if we really want to change trafficking is we have to train the police. I mean, the police are the tip of the spear for all of this, right? Whether you're the community calling in and trying to report trafficking, or you're a prosecutor that's trying to prosecute a trafficking case, if the police don't do their job, then no one's going to get prosecuted and no one's even going to get arrested in the first place. And in order for the police to do their job correctly, they have to be trained. I mean, we, of course, are trained police to go arrest drunk drivers. Why would we not have trained them to go arrest traffickers? But we don't. And then we expect them to just know how to do it. And really what is I find really interesting is once we see the training and do the training and complete the training, we see that change immediately. I mean, it changes immediately.
Mm-hmm. And so when you retired, it was state patrolman, right?
Correct.
Okay. So after you retired, you were like, okay, I'm not done with this. I see that there's a really big need and a big piece of this puzzle that's missing. And so that's kind of when you started, coming up with the idea of training law enforcement, like you just said, and making sure that they knew what to do. And that is when you started the Human Trafficking Training Center, right?
Correct.
And then, so tell us just a little bit about, well, how long ago was it? And how hard was it to start something like this? Because I know it's not been an easy task. And I know that you travel all the time, and that you've really, really made a mark, and you're making waves. I know here in the United States and outside of the United States. So just tell us like a little bit about, how you got the idea and what it was like to get it off the ground.
So my official retirement date was September 1 of 21. And we actually did our first training like the 21st of September. So really about 3 weeks after I retired, we did our first training. And the idea of the training really came from my experience in law enforcement. I mean, I was doing the human trafficking unit for the state patrol. I was doing the law enforcement side of the human trafficking task force under the attorney general across the state. And what I saw time and time again was that we were not trained properly. I was never trained properly. Most of these people are not trained. Even to this day, we're not trained. And people think, oh, yeah, but that's probably like the small departments that are just not trained. No, it's all of them. It doesn't matter how big you are. It doesn't matter how small you are. I mean, I never had training in the academy on human trafficking as a state trooper. The other example that I use is the FBI. The FBI gets zero training in human trafficking in their academy. None, not any. And you're like, well, how is that even possible? Because that's where we are. I mean, we just don't train law enforcement in America when it comes to human trafficking. And I keep harping it and harping on it, and people I'm sure get sick of me saying it, but as soon as you train law enforcement, it immediately changes. So I'll give you an example. Last year, we trained 4,927 police officers in America.
How many?
In 4,927 in 28 states, right? We did 49 trainings in 28 states, trained 4,927 officers. Those officers left our training, literally left the training, and found 272 trafficking victims. The quickest was 4 hours and 15 minutes, and the youngest was 11. Immediately makes a change.
Wow.
I mean, you were in one of our trainings,
Yes.
and what has happened? Literally, people from that training are finding trafficking victims. I mean, just the other day, somebody from that exact training that you were in called me, and then I put him in contact with you, and you were trying to help that trafficking victim.
Mhm.
I mean, it happens immediately.
It does. Well, and I think that people need to know that human trafficking is not new. It's not a new crime. It's been around forever. However, now it's gaining traction, and I'm not sure, Dan, why people are more willing to talk about it. Like you said, several years ago, when you were in the police academy, you didn't have any training on this. Why? Because it didn't exist? No, that's not it. Is it becoming something that people are more comfortable talking about? Like, why now are we hearing so much about trafficking? And why now are people more willing to talk about it?
I think we're just kind of I think we're just figuring it out. And what I refer to as right now is almost like the Renaissance era of trafficking, right? Where
Yeah.
we're kind of starting to wrap our head around a little bit better. I mean, you can go back 30 years ago, 35 years ago, and remember how we treated domestic violence, right?
Mhm.
Completely different than how we do it now. I mean, I remember when I was a young trooper going on calls, and you had the old crusty trooper that was getting ready to retire. And I remember this vividly. I was probably in, early 20s, mid 20s, whatever it was. And I remember going to a domestic violence call, and this lady had like a big black eye. Clearly, her husband had punched her in the face. And I remember this officer looked at her and said, well, what'd you do to piss him off?
Mm.
And I'm thinking, I'm not sure that's the right thing to be doing, right? But that's what we did back in those days. And
Right.
now we treat that completely different. I mean, prior to Columbine, how we handled mass shooters was completely different, right? We
Fair enough.
surrounded the place and we waited for the SWAT team to show up. And now we don't do that. Now we go right in and find that target and stop the threat immediately, right?
Yeah.
So we've evolved as law enforcement, or we are, I should say. We're not evolved yet, but we're evolving, and I
Mhm.
think we're evolving as a society. And I brought up the old Clint Eastwood movies because I grew up watching them. I like them. I still like them as an adult, right?
Yeah.
Think about those old movies where we watch the quote unquote pimp beating up these girls because they weren't giving up all their money to the pimp. Remember in those old movies we
Yeah.
would watch that? Now, what were we thinking about then? Were we
Yeah.
not thinking that these women are being trafficked? We didn't call it trafficking. We didn't call them traffickers. That we called them pimps.
Right.
But what
Same
were we
thing.
thinking? And I look
Yeah.
back and go, how did I not see that? How did I
Mhm.
not add 1 + 1 = 2 and go, gee, these women are doing this. These pimps are controlling them and then beating them and taking all the money. What was I
Right.
thinking? Was I thinking they just wanted to do that? They want to get beat up and not have any money?
Yeah, well, and yeah, I guess our way of thinking has evolved too. And, I think that there's a part of us as humans is when we do see something like that or we witness something like that, we don't wanna think like what you just explained, we don't wanna think that there's people that are being forced or being held or, being lied to, that it's such a hard thing for most of us humans to think about that, maybe it's just easier to kinda go, "Oh, I'm sure she's asking for it," or, "I'm sure she's doing this for some reason." And the truth of the matter is that never in a trafficking situation does anyone ever want to be in that, desire that, they are being forced, they are being lied to. And so, I'm glad that we're able to have these conversations now, with just with your whether it's your neighbor or law enforcement or whoever it is, because that's really the only way that you're going to be able to identify what is really happening. So, well, what happens, Dan, when let's say let's use physicians and nurses. Let's start with them. So we know that many trafficking victims, for one reason or another, have to have a doctor's visit or a hospital visit. Not all of them do, unfortunately, but many of them do. So what happens in these situations when doctors and nurses don't know what to look for, don't know the signs to look for, don't know the questions to ask, don't know the questions not to ask. Why is it so important for them to know?
Well, other than law enforcement, because law enforcement has to be the tip of the spear because they're the only ones that can arrest and
Mhm.
investigate, right? But other than law enforcement, the next funnel point, so to speak, or the next place that we really need to think about is medical. Again, the research is pretty consistent on this. Around 88% of trafficking victims in America utilize the medical system while they're being trafficked. The average is about 6 times. So if you think about this, I mean, these girls have all kinds of, issues. They're getting beat up. They're getting assaulted. They're getting sexually assaulted. They have STIs and UTIs, and they have all kinds of issues going on, right? And
Mhm.
so they're going through the medical system. But just like law enforcement, doctors and nurses are not trained in nursing school and medical school about human trafficking. So of the 88% that we know are utilizing the medical system, we're only identifying 4%. 4% out of the 88 in all of America are we finding in the medical system. And again, once we train nurses and doctors, we see that immediately change. We see it
Mhm.
change where they start finding all these trafficking victims. And again, you were at the training that we did in St. Louis, where we had a whole bunch of law enforcement there, but we had a whole bunch of nurses and stuff in there,
Yeah.
and those nurses started finding trafficking victims immediately.
Yeah. Well, and to kind of go back to what you said just a little while ago, due to that training, there was an emergency room nurse at one of the hospitals local to our area here in Missouri, that, because of your training, she was able to identify someone that was being trafficked in the ER. She was there and she was left outside of the ER, non-responsive, highly intoxicated and, drugs in her system and was left there. And this victim in particular just did disclose because the nurse asked the right questions and let her tell her that she was in a horrific, I'm not going to get into the details, but a horrific situation and contacted you because you're nice enough to tell people they're like, hey, my goal is to have a system within your own community of people to be able to call, of advocates, of resources, law enforcement, so that there is a group of people that can connect with each other to make things happen and make things happen fast. And that is what is absolutely pertinent in these situations, is that things happen fast, because once they disclose, a lot of times they're going to regret that they disclose and things got to happen fast. So if they're saying, yes, I want help, it's got to come quickly or they are going to leave, run, or whatever the situation may be. But talking to this nurse, that after she had called you and said, what do? I have a victim of trafficking here. You gave my name and number, and she called me and we had a great conversation. And she told me, she said, I would not have known what to do if I was not in one of Dan Nash's classes training for the Human Trafficking Training Center. And I knew what to look for. And it took her a minute. It was like she had to like find the guts, because she knew what to do, and she just had to do it, and she just had to act on it. And I told her, I was like, I am so proud of you because you were right. And she, not only were you right, she was willing to take help. But it needed to happen fast. And that's a whole nother part of the story. But yeah, she was so grateful. And it's just one person at a time. If you can just continue to educate people like this, you literally you're going to save a life. And I just thought that that was really, really cool, really important. And like I told you the other day, I can't say enough about the work that you're doing, and you're just, you're making things happen. So, um, good work to you.
Well, thank
I
you. It's
saw
very
I saw it
kind of you.
firsthand. And you always do tell me, after training, you're like, it's almost like you're like a little kid. I got another phone call. I got another law enforcement, saw some, a victim and identified a victim. And so, how many times after you do a training, Dan, would you say that you get a phone call like that, whether it's from law enforcement or, a doctor, a nurse? How many times would you say that someone lets you know, hey, thank you for the training, I was able to help? Oh, you know what? You had one that was not too long ago. You had a gentleman, law enforcement officer, that was just so excited that he had found, um, victims of trafficking. And it was right after your training. I know it happens a lot, but there was one that I remember in particular, that I don't know. I don't know why this one in particular stands out to me. Maybe it was because there were several people involved. Was that maybe New York?
I'm not sure. You have to jog my memory and let me know which one you're talking about. But
I
I mean, it
know.
happens all the time because I mean, I actually keep stats on this so we can try to, because I'm all about results, right? And if we're not getting results, then we need to change what we're doing. So I can tell you as of this morning, because I got a call yesterday about someone else, that we're up to 611 trafficking victims since we started training in September of 2021. The officers that we have trained have found 611 trafficking victims.
That's unbelievable. 611. Okay,
Mhm.
I guess it would be too hard to tell how many traffickers got prosecuted from
That
finding
is
those.
really, really hard to do because some of the prosecutions might take 2 or 3 years to go through the system. So in other words, to be able to I tried to figure out a way to do that, and there just isn't a way to really do it. Plus there's plea bargains, and people don't get convicted of trafficking, they get convicted of promoting prostitution or something else. And once it gets into the criminal justice system, it's really difficult to keep on top of it.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I wanted to ask you your feelings on the fact that right now there are 85 to 100,000 missing kids in our country that are not American citizens. Um, do you know about that? Do you know about that number?
I do.
Yeah. So I just wanna know how you feel about it. If you feel like, our system has dropped the ball, what you feel like should be done, because the facts are that many of these children are being trafficked in one way or the other.
So we know that even before the border situation created the current situation that we're in, we know that if you are a child and you're a runaway or you're in the foster care system or anything like that, we know you're super highly um, subjective to being trafficked. I mean, we know
Mhm.
that you're way, 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 way more likely than a kid that's not in one of those systems, right? And some instances, there's some research out there that suggests that 1 in 5 runaways are trafficked. I mean,
Mhm.
the numbers are really staggeringly high.
Yeah.
So if you have now you're bringing in more children and they're clearly already in a vulnerable situation, clearly, or they wouldn't be coming to the United States, they wouldn't be crossing the border as they are, or
Mhm.
they're doing that because they're already vulnerable. So now we're
Right.
bringing these more vulnerable people into the country, and then we don't know where they go or what happens to them. I mean,
Mhm.
nobody really knows what the percentages are. We may never know. It may take us 5, 10 years to know, or we may never know how many of those 80,000 kids that we don't know where they went to are being trafficked or sexually abused or whatever. But the numbers are really pretty high. If we just look at what the numbers are of our own runaways in America, and that's 1 in 5. So if we
Mhm.
take 1 in 5 of 80,000, that's a lot of kids.
It's a lot of kids, and we already have, a ton too many missing kids, American children missing and being exploited or victimized in some way, and it's heartbreaking when you add that number to the tally and to the statistic. It's sad because these children, for one reason or another, are seeking safety and security by coming to this country, regardless of, if their mom or dad brings them over, or brother or sister, a cartel member, whatever it may be, getting here and in crossing into our country, and for something like that to happen to so many kids, it's really disgraceful and it's disheartening. And you know me, like I wish I could just go find them all, scoop them all up, give them a safe place. It's not going to happen, but um, you know, the reason I wanted to talk just a little bit about that is because a lot of people misconstrue human smuggling and trafficking, and kind of think that they're one and the same. And I wanted you, if you could, just to make sure that people understand the difference between smuggling and human trafficking.
Yeah, that's another really confusing thing. The two things that I think people confuse the most is the difference between a trafficker and a predator, and the difference between smuggling and trafficking. So
Mhm.
smuggling is basically taking somebody across an international border, right? You can't smuggle somebody from Missouri to Illinois, but you can smuggle somebody from Mexico to the United States, right?
Mhm.
I can consent to be smuggled. Happens every single day on the border. I pay Coyote $10,000 to take me across the border. I can consent to that. I can't consent to be trafficked any more than I can consent to be murdered, right?
Right.
And with trafficking, it can occur both internationally or domestically. And with smuggling, you have to come across a border. So you'll see these news stories all the time where an officer will stop a car and there's 8 or 9 or 10 people in the van, and they're from, I don't know, El Salvador or wherever they're from, right? And they're not in the country illegally or legally, and they're driving to Chicago or wherever they're from. Well, that's for
Mhm.
sure smuggling, right?
Right.
But we call it trafficking all the time, and that's really not trafficking. It could be trafficking if there's force, fraud, and coercion taking place, but you have to have force, fraud, and coercion that takes place to be
Yeah.
trafficked unless you're a juvenile, right? If
Mhm.
you're a juvenile, that's not required, but if you're an adult, there has to be force, fraud, and coercion. So can I be smuggled and then trafficked? Yes. If I'm smuggled over here, I pay the money, I come to the United States, and then now there's force, fraud, or coercion used against me to traffic me. Yes. But most of these cases that we see are not trafficking. They're not force, fraud, and coercion. It's just people being smuggled. Now,
Yeah.
smuggling is a crime in and of itself, just a different
Mhm.
crime. So you can
Yeah.
arrest somebody for smuggling people, just like you can arrest somebody for trafficking people. But people use the terms interchangeably. And just yesterday, I was talking to an elected official, and they kept talking about trafficking. I'm like, no, you're talking about smuggling. Those are two different things, and we're so confused by that.
Yeah. Yeah, we are. And yeah, because I hear people, talk about them as though they are one and the same all the time. And, people, it's important to know the difference, that just because you see a trunk full of, whether it's children or adults that are stuffed inside a car and they're coming over the border, that does not mean that they are being trafficked. I mean, it can be easy to kind of, because I think our assumptions are something bad's going to happen, or they're going to be trafficked, or just the word trafficking is probably just a little bit easier word, to relate to in regards to that. But okay, so I've been doing all the talking and all the questioning. So I want you to tell me anything that you want to tell me about trafficking, what you want to do, what your vision is, what you want people to know. You can ask me a question, anything.
Well, what I would like to do, my goal of trafficking is honestly just to stop it, right?
Mhm.
And to do what we can. And we have not been doing a very good job with that, really, ever. And so I want to change that. I want to literally change what we're doing, change the world, so to speak. And I think the first thing we have to do that is train the police, right? Because you got to get them trained. If the police are not trained and nothing happens, if you call 911 and nobody will do anything, then that stops everything, right? So the police have got to be trained so they know what to do. And then I'd like to go in and get all these hospital people trained, these ER nurses, these doctors, all those folks trained. And then lastly, we just go into our schools and we train the kids in the schools. If we
Mhm.
just did those three things, we don't need to change a bunch of laws. We don't need to have galas and put red sand on the sidewalk and all dress in blue one day and all these other things that we do for human trafficking that really don't amount to a hill of beans. What we need to do is train the police, train the medical people, go into the schools, teach the kids about grooming and exploitation and vulnerabilities and all that. If we
Love
just did
that.
those three things, you will completely move the needle on human trafficking. None of them are
Yeah.
sexy, none of them are so fun, but that's what you're going to have to do if you're going to actually stop human trafficking.
I could not agree with you more. I truly, truly believe that children need to be educated, parents need to be educated on how to avoid being exploited. Even if you are in a vulnerable situation, how to avoid those circumstances and to keep yourself safe, whether it's, your physical self when you're in a different environment, whether it's social media, any way that someone can contact you and get a hold of you. It's really important to know those things and make sure that it doesn't happen, because you and I, we've talked several times, and we would like to save the world and human trafficking, and make sure that it didn't have its claws in one more victim. We both know that's not going to happen, but like you said, you can move the needle and you can make a difference, the more and more people that are made aware of what's going on and the truths of it. The truths, the myths, and the facts are all just so important to know. Otherwise, you're not gonna be able to differentiate, what's going on. What else? Anything else that you can
I
think of?
wish, I wish, I wish here in America we could actually have like an actual strategy. So I
Mhm.
asked someone the other day, I said, and this is someone in the human trafficking field, like you, and I asked them, I said, can you look at an agency or a person or some, tell me who's leading, tell me who is taking this on their shoulders. I mean, what law enforcement agency,
Mhm.
what governmental agency, what person is actually the person that we look to and go, that's the human trafficking person, that's the government agency that's doing it. And the answer is, I ask people this all across the country when I travel, no one can tell me. No one can
Yeah.
tell me who that person is. No one can tell me who that government agency is. No one can tell me anything. We literally have no strategy. We literally have no leader. We're like a ship that's floating along with no rudder and no captain, and nobody's at the steering wheel. And then we wonder why trafficking is growing like it is. So the illicit massage business industry. I just taught a class yesterday on this in Kansas. It's of all the trafficking in America, it is the fastest growing in America, and it's
Mhm.
Chinese organized crime. It's up 32% in 3 years, 46% in 8 years. And what are we doing about it?
Right.
Nothing. We're doing nothing about it.
Well, let me ask you this. Are you saying that you feel like something should start on a state level? Are you talking about federally? Do you think that the leadership and of our country right now, do you think that the current administration, do you think that they could do more, could do less? Are there changes, that need to happen that high up into the chain? Or, where do you feel like it needs to start?
Well, I think, as in with most law enforcement, I mean, the Constitution was set up pretty clear that they wanted the power of law enforcement to be with the state and local police, right?
Yeah.
I get that. I'm a firm believer in that. But does that not mean that we don't also need a federal response of some kind? Of course
Mhm.
we do. This needs to be a local problem. It is a local problem. It's a state problem. It's a federal problem. We need to all be doing our part. And
Yeah.
your question was, what is our federal government doing? Are they not doing enough? Well, my question is, what are we doing at all? Can
Yeah.
someone explain to me what the federal government is actually doing at all to stop human trafficking? We have an open border. We have no human trafficking czar. We have no human trafficking person within the federal government. I told you the FBI has no training in the academy. The U.S. Marshals have no training in the academy. Homeland Security gets 4 hours in their academy. Customs and Border Patrol has almost no training.
Mm.
We haven't even trained federal law enforcement. What are we doing?
Yeah.
And the
That's
answer
a
is, I don't
really good
know.
question.
Nobody knows.
Mm. Yeah, so it can be super frustrating because of that. Well, okay, so if someone listening wanted to know, how they could get your training or go to one of your classes, how would they find you?
You can find me at the Human Trafficking Training Center.com. That's all
Mhm.
one word together, Human Trafficking Training Center.com. Our trainings are open to specific folks. So they're open to law enforcement, medical community, probation and parole, child protective services, social services, all those kinds of folks, people like yourself that are advocates that work in the human trafficking field. We don't open them up to the general public. We do have an online class on our website. So if you're a member of the general public and you want to learn, it's about a 4-hour training. It takes most of our law enforcement training. We take all the law enforcement sensitive stuff out. So it's really, really inclusive. I mean, we cover everything from tattoos to all kinds of different stuff in there. You
Mhm.
can purchase that off of our website if you want to, get your family trained or whoever trained. And then for everyone else, you can just go to our website, see where we are, see where we're training, and then you can just sign up. That's
And
as
it's
easy
and
as it
your
is.
I would like to say that your website is super easy to navigate. Like you said, you can literally just go, click a date, find out where the training's gonna happen. And for any law enforcement that is listening, I cannot tell you how empowering it is to go to one of or several of these classes. It's super important. I walked out of there and I said to Dan, I was like, I feel like a real dummy, didn't I? I was like, I feel like there were so many things that I learned, brand new things. And just when you think that you can't read any more about this or do any more research about this, there were just so many things that I didn't know. And so much that I had to come back and I had already recorded several episodes for Invisible Innocence. And I had to come back, told my producer, Joe, over here, we need to redo them. He's like, why, Megan? I'm like, because I have to change some of the information. Not a lot, but some, because I wanna make sure I get it right. I wanna make sure that people have the truth and that I can be as accurate and up to date as I possibly can. And one of the things that I had to change was the closing to several of my episodes. And Dan taught me that although the human trafficking hotline is great for resource, well, Dan, I'm gonna let you explain why when people listen to me during my Invisible Innocence episodes, at the end, you will hear me say, please call 911 and then use the trafficking hotline as a resource. So you want to explain?
So
Not
when
to put you
the
on
you
the
when
spot,
the
but
national hotline was created, it was basically created some 20 years ago, or whatever it was now, for two purposes. One, to allow victims have a centralized place to call, and so if they need services, they need help, They could call a centralized number no matter where they are in America. Everybody would know that number, and they could get services. And far as I understand, that is still 100% in place, and as well it should be. The other segment of the national hotline was to, if you're a trucker or you're a convenience store worker or you're whoever, and you see something that you think is trafficking, right? We want you to call. That's why we tell people, if you see something, say something. And we wanted a national number that people could call, and then that information would flow to a properly trained law enforcement person wherever you are in America, so that we could get that information to law enforcement. Because if we don't actually arrest the traffickers, so for example, if we just go out and help trafficking victims and we don't arrest the traffickers, well, what does the trafficker do? He just goes and gets another victim. And we
Yep,
simply
moves
are a
down the
hamster
line.
running around on a wheel. We haven't actually solved anything. So you
Mhm.
have to get this information to law enforcement, right?
Yes.
And for years, that was what was happening. Well, since then, the National Hotline has changed how they do things, and now they are no longer reporting that information to law enforcement. So many states across the country have created their own state human trafficking hotlines. Now there's, I don't know,
Mhm.
about half, 26, 27 states, something like that. I saw Ohio just got theirs up and running this week. Florida got theirs up and running a couple, 3 weeks ago. So these states have recognized we've got to have a mechanism to get this information to law enforcement. So these
Yeah.
states are picking up that responsibility and doing it on their own. So
Yeah.
if you were to call the national hotline and report something that you want to go to law enforcement, it won't get there.
Yeah. Yeah. So, frustrating as it may sound, just call 911 if you or someone you know may be exploited in this way or in any way at all, and then just use the human trafficking hotline as a resource. But, Dan, I did want to say that I wish you luck. I won't say anything about it, even though this episode won't be out until after, this event that you are highly involved in is going to happen in a couple days. I wish you the most luck. What you're doing, I think, is absolutely incredible, and I want to have you back on so that we can talk about what happened. And I think that you're going to have a lot of exciting news. So make sure you guys come back and listen to Dan when he has some awesome news to talk about. Right? It's going to be awesome.
Absolutely, 100%. I'm going to be back.
Yeah.
In fact,
Are you nervous?
we're gonna be like be back right after this
Yeah,
thing that we
you're
just finished
coming
talking
on. Yeah, you're gonna come on my other show next Monday, the 26th, to talk about it. So
about. I
we're
think
we're
that's
gonna
right.
get you back on here. Yeah, the 26th. I'm pumped. But are you nervous?
I'm always nervous. Yeah, I don't ever
Don't.
sleep the night before we get involved in things, and yeah,
Yeah.
I'm always nervous.
Well, God bless you and be with you, and I wish you just so much success. It's gonna be
Thank you. I
awesome.
appreciate
But
that.
anything else you want to wrap up with?
No, I'm good. Just thanks for inviting me, and
Yes,
and
we're gonna have you
I'm
back soon. Yeah,
appreciate
for
that.
sure. Yeah, you're welcome. So, thanks again for watching, listening, and one more time, if you or someone you know may be exploited in this or any way, please call 911 when you are in a safe place, or you can call the Human Trafficking Hotline as a resource. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.